Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Geek Out Room podcast. Don't forget you can listen to our episodes over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Just type in Geek Out Room podcast in the search engine and you should find us. Or you can watch our episodes over on our YouTube channel, Sauceless Entertainment. With that being said, today we're talking about comic books versus manga. Let's get it. So DC Comics president Jim Lee, which I didn't know he was the DC president, to be honest with you, but he said that Japanese manga and anime is incredibly powerful, and he often finds himself wondering what is missing in Western comics and why aren't they able to achieve the same thing. And he goes on to say, I think manga has an advantage over American comics, which are mostly about superheroes, and that's where the majority of sales and readers are concentrated, right? In Japan, it's closer to literature, and anyone can read it. And it's not just hero stories. There's a much wider range of genres, like stories about cooking and soccer. You can draw stories from that. So I'm very happy that manga has been so successful because it gives me a goal to aim for, which is very interesting. And I find this point really interesting to talk about because I guess I should start here. I do think manga is getting more popular or has passed American comics for a couple years now, right? And I think one of the biggest, points in the history of this that you can really say the advantage went to manga was around 2020 to 2021. I think that's when we really start seeing a shift. Because I think with the rise of TikTok, the rise of Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, all that stuff, the rise of basically all short form content, right? You got so much share of manga collections. You got so much share of anime reactions. You got so much shares of just these clips or manga edits and all these things, and it really drew a lot of people in, so much so when people got an influx of cash, or they went to local Barnes and Nobles and they went to straight to the manga section because a lot of people were new to this manga game, and they're like, oh, there's a story about, whether it could be fairy tale or it could be about Dragon Ball Z, it could be about Pokemon, it could be Legend of Zelda has a manga as well. There's so many different mangas. Excuse me. There's so many different mangas. So people get really invested in the story, want to check it out, and they'll go to Barnes Nobles and buy manga in masses. Trust me, I remember the huge boom of how much people would buy manga and how much money people would spend. And you have not only just Barnes and Nobles, you have Books A Million, you have all these things. So much so, the sales literally started generating manga sections, because manga sections used to just be tucked away with the comic book sections. It used to be just a comic book section, but now with the rise of anime and manga and just book social media, people started really hunting these things and started giving such a huge influx of cash to these bookstores that more Barnes & Noble started popping out, more Books A Million started popping out at a time in which they were dying off and closing in mass numbers. So that's how popular manga got. Don't get me wrong, there is a huge space for comic book readers as well online. There's a huge presence. There's many accounts and many creators and many events in which comic book centered content, but it's not nearly as popular or nearly as many as there is accounts that center around their content to anime and manga, right? I mean, it's not even close. And that influx right there, that content creation, that social media advertising, is so much marketing for manga that's free for these manga companies. It's free. I mean, you see the popularity of Yen Press, you see the popularity of Kodansha, you see the popularity of Viz Media, and so on and so forth. You see how popular One Piece is. I mean, if it hasn't surpassed Superman, it's very close. I think it surpassed Harry Potter years ago. That's how popular manga is getting. You see the Macy's Day Thanksgiving Parade. You see more and more of these characters that originated from mangas, whether it's Goku, whether it's Luffy. There's all these characters are starting to get introduced. It's not just your Hello Kitty anymore. It's like or your Pikachu's. Like it's starting to get more and more characters. And the more you see, you also see Naruto floats and things like that. The more these characters are entering the human consciousness of the mass public, not just a subsect of nerds or geeks, right, that just enjoy these things in their little isolated area. It's getting so mainstream. And you have something like Naruto, which has been in the mainstream consciousness for so long, or you see something like Dragon Ball Z that's been in the mainstream for so long. Those are two of the many examples where it comes from manga originated characters. I know there's Hello Kitty and there is Pikachu / Ash, Pokemon, and how popular that is. Those are not manga, or those are not characters that originated from manga, so that's why I'm excluding them, for example. But Pokemon does have their own manga, of course they do. But so you have characters that originated from manga. You have these stories that are super diverse because, like Jim Lee said, there are manga like Food Wars where it is about cooking, it's about foods, about flavor, and then you can go get a story that's just super action packed like a Dragon Ball Z, right, or like a adventure story like Inuyasha or Fairy Tail. Then you can get something that's like this genre called isekai, which is you die in real world, you get transported to a fantasy world. So really, there is manga's version of fantasy genres, right? In essence, there are fantasy stories, but those I think count in fantasy stories as well. So you have things like that. You have stories where people get trapped into a different space, like a Sword Art Online. You got so many things like that. And where I think comic books and manga differ a lot, right, is adaptations. Okay? Because comic books, we're really talking about superhero comic books here, because there are definitely many different comic books that are not just DC and Marvel, right? You have Image Comics, you have so many other stuff. But superhero comics dominate so much because obviously they're so popular. That's why they spent over 100 years being so popular. But the adaptations are different because when you have an MCU movie or DC EU movie or whatever you want to call them, DC movies, unless it's an animated movie that's adapting from a story, a lot of these live action adaptations are pulling material from the source material and sprinkling it into their stories. Like Captain America Civil War, right? It was not a one-to-one adaptation. It was loosely based on the comic book, like very loosely based on the comic book, right? Whereas anime, you get not always a one-on-one adaptation, but very close. Like if you're a One Piece fan, you're pretty much getting page to screen. Okay, you get something like maybe like a Dragon Ball Z. You get something again like Naruto. A lot of these stories, I'm just using them because those are the most popular one that a lot of people know. You get those, and it's pretty much a page to animation adaptation, like where you're seeing in the anime. For the most part, like 90%, or even you want to go lower than that, like I would say no lower than 85%. For those stories that I said in particular, you're getting a direct adaptation for those stories. Like fans can read the manga and be like, "Oh man, I can't wait for this to get animated," right? Or like many people in the West, you discover the anime first, and that attracts you to the manga because sometimes the manga is different. Or you can get stories like The Promised Neverland, where the anime greatly differs from the manga, where the anime is not that good or started good and went terribly because the adaptation is really off. And people are like, no, the manga is way better, and it attracts people to the source material, and they buy that up. Or you can have a story that's not finished. Sometimes the anime catches up to the manga, or the manga doesn't have enough, or it has been on hiatus, so they just adapt what they can, and then they do a more faithful adaptation later. The biggest example of this I can think of is Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood versus Fullmetal Alchemist. Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is a more faithful adaptation to the source material, whereas Fullmetal Alchemist is more of an anime only at a certain point, to be honest with you. So there's that. And then manga can have a live action adaptation, like Bleach had it, Full Metal Alchemist. There's been a live action adaptation. We don't talk about Dragon Ball Z, but there's stuff like that. There's plays. There's video games. There's so many things, but all of those things are really closely tied into the source material. Whereas comic books, a lot of the times when you see these games and these movies and all these things, a lot of it has nothing to do with the comic books. The comic books are very separated. They're their own situation and thing, where these other media forms or mediums really just take inspiration from these storylines. They take inspirations from Secret Invasion. They take inspirations from A Brand New Day. They take inspiration from Civil War 1 or 2. They take inspiration from The Dark Knight. They take they take all these inspirations and sprinkle, whether it's a outfit or whether it's a certain story beat or point or line or character, and kind of create their own thing still with the TV show or movie, if that makes sense. And sometimes I definitely will still promote people to want to go and check out the comic book. But another thing about comic books is the history. They're very old. It's very hard and very intimidating to just jump into a comic book series because it's hard. When it comes to One Piece, there's a beginning. Bleach, there's a beginning. Dragon Ball, there's a beginning. Naruto, there's a beginning. Inuyasha, there's a beginning. Right? And the story's completed, there's a beginning, middle, end. For comic books, there's so many characters, so many storylines. It's really hard for a novice to go in and just start a story. Because, okay, I like Batman. I saw a Batman movie, I really like that. Or I saw an episode of Batman TV show or something, I really like that. Oh, and there's a comic book series. Okay, where do I start? All right. And I know for comic book fans, it could be simple. Oh, start with The Long Halloween, or start with this story, start with that story. That runs really fun. Yeah, but some people like that cohesive, linear beginning to end. And there really is no such thing in superhero comic books when it comes to specifically Marvel and DC. So it can be really hard for certain people. Which is why what is cool about comic books is that there are others that are not just Marvel and DC characters. You have Invincible, right? Invincible is a comic book series that started as a comic book and now has a really great and popular animated show on Amazon Prime that people really enjoy, right? So you have things like that. You have another famous one is The Walking Dead that started out both by Robert Kirkman, by the way, but The Walking Dead has a beginning, middle, end, right, in their comics. And they made it into a live action adaptation that was really beloved by fans for 9, 10, 11 years. So you have situations like that, and it will promote people to go and seek out the source material. But I'm telling you, not like how it is for anime, because usually, again, when someone's like, oh, I really want to read this manga, hey, you can get these volumes, and you can get it, and there's a beginning and end. There, you know where you're beginning of the story, you know where the end of the story is. Or hey, this anime is here. This anime has 24 episodes, but I don't want to wait for the anime to get animated again so I can watch it in 6 years. Where can I finish the story? Oh, you can actually go pick up right where you left off in anime on volume 6, and there's 24 volumes total, or 48 volumes total, and the manga's over. You can just go pick it up and read it and finish it. You don't always get that benefit when it comes to comic books. Because again, if you're like, oh, I watched Captain America Civil War, right, the movie. Really enjoyed it. Well, yeah, I can't really go pick up a comic book and continue. And also the comic book for Civil War is drastically different than the movie. So you're reading really a completely different story than the show. Or sorry, the movie, right? And so that can get complicated for fans. Again, it's hard to jump in. And I ask people who are already fans of this stuff to take off your glasses for a second, right? Your rose glasses. For you, who's already been indoctrinated into comics, period, whether it is superhero comics or not, you know how comic books run, you know how it goes, and all that other stuff. For people who are novices, who never picked up a comic book or manga in their life, who just watch TV or movies or read light novels or stuff like that, they're not going to understand or know comic books. It's really intimidating to jump in, which is why comic book stores are really important and essential, right? The issue with that is sometimes comic book store, and that's another point too. Sometimes comic book stores, man, and creators can be really pretentious when it comes to comic books. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of influencers slash creators who do the exact same thing for manga and anime, but again, anime, because the how linear a story can get, you can just like kind of go into a story from the beginning to end and kind of just pick a story, then move on to a different story. It's a lot easier to kind of get into again, and it's also anime adaptations. All these things you can look into. Comic books, because of how vast and how many lines and stories are for every single character, it can be really difficult, and how drastically the arts can change and all this kind of stuff is very difficult. So when you go into a comic book store, it's really overwhelming because there's a bunch of comics. You're surrounded by a bunch. And when you have a workers or owners that aren't kind to new people trying to get into it, it can be really difficult. I've been to many conventions where comic book stores will have booths, and I've seen them be really unkind to women, people of color, and just people in general, and it just turns people off from comics. It really does, because again, owning a comic book store, you're almost like a librarian, bro. Like, you're the one who knows all these different lines, all these different stories, all these different characters. You can give all these recommendations, where to start, where to begin, where to end, all these different things. So when you're not giving a pleasant experience to people who are trying to get into it, it will really turn people off to that medium. And again, I'm not saying that manga doesn't have its dark side or people who are really rude or mean about it. But again, it's just easier when you're like on Crunchyroll or not even Crunchyroll. Because if you're not an anime fan, let's say you just have like a Netflix and you know, over 2020, COVID year, stuff like that, you got into Demon Slayer, something like many people did. You would then be like, oh, I really like this Demon Slayer anime. And someone's like, oh, there's like a comic book type thing for Demon Slayer where you can, and the story's finished. You can actually just go pick up the story and finish it. A lot of people did that. A lot of people went and got the manga and read it and was really pleased with it. Or another anime right now that's doing pretty well is Hell's Paradise. Hell's Paradise was super popular during like 2020, 2021 in terms of its volumes. It was really difficult to get your hands on copies of Hell's Paradise. Trust me, I remember that time. So there's all those things, right? Where you just see these things and you're like, hey, or even Invincible when that came out. Like, people were like, oh, this is a comic book. You can just go to a store and go get yourself copies of Invincible. And what's nice about Invincible, it's a one-off universe where it's like, hey, there's these omnibuses or these comic books or volumes or graphic novels for Invincible where you can just go pick up the story. Like, hey, season 1 ended here. You can read this volume and continue going. Again, Invincible is not a part of DC or Marvel where it's like, oh, there's this Invincible story, but then there's the Invincible story the world got rebooted with a crisis event, and now it's this Invincible story, but then this one had another crisis event where it got rebooted. Now there's this one where you do for like Batman, Superman, all those other characters, or Iron Man, all these other characters, right? So I think social media plays a huge part of it. I think marketing plays a big part of it. Comic books are not marketed. I'm not going to lie to you. I really, outside of like conventions and very specific things, I don't see comic books getting marketed except from like social media, like content creators, right? I just don't see comics getting marketed where they need to. Because again, I feel like manga, at least in the States, right, doesn't necessarily get marketed that well or at all, really. But they don't really need to because they already get a lot of free promotion from anime and manga content creators and influencers, but also they are really prevalent at every single convention, in my opinion, way more than comic books are. When you go to like anime convention or well, obviously anime convention, when you go to a Comic-Con, like San Diego Comic-Con, New York Comic-Con, whatever Comic-Con you are, where it's like encompasses all nerd stuff, the presence is very anime manga heavy. Like the Viz Media booth, the Sueisha booth, or Shonen Jump booth, like Kodansha, like Yen Press, they have these massive booths that are either interactive or give exclusives, and they decorate with all these manga panels and everything. DC, Marvel, Image, Dark Horse, a lot of these other publishers either have a very lackluster presence or no presence at all. Like they don't hype up, they don't advertise, they do nothing. The only advertisements for comics be when you're reading other comics. And that can be a little bit of the unfortunate part, is that there's so much to enjoy in comics, but they're so bad at advertising it. And whereas again, anime does a lot of advertising for the manga and the creators and the games, and there's so much that can advertise this manga, right? So again, I'm not just talking about shonen. There's romance stories, there's more adult stories, there are stories again about, you can go, manga so diverse, we can go a story about soccer, to food, to giant robots fighting each other, to psychological thrillers, to these school romances, or adult workplace romances, or comedies, and all these different things. So there's so much for a person. Like there's so much, like, hey, if I don't like action heavy stuff, I can go read about like romance. There's plenty of romance stories. Oh, I don't like romance, but I like action. There's that. Oh, I like psychological thrillers. There's that. Oh, I like fantasy stuff. There's that. There's a variety. I mean, the manga stuff goes deep when it comes to genres. Comic books, there's more stuff than just superhero for sure. There's more than just Marvel, DC, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Invincibles, like stuff like that, The Walking Dead. But those are a lot more indie, and they don't dominate the space nearly as much as what Webtoons has accomplished, what Shonen Jump has accomplished, and stuff like that. So the conversation is always interesting. How can comic book get more prevalent? I don't know, because a lot of people in the comic book industry also, just like how manga has a really dark industry and has really dark past, present, and future, comic books do as well. But a lot of the difference is, a lot of comic book creators are not afraid to call out how bad the industry is. They are not afraid to call it out. And I think it's very important that the comic book industry changes how they treat their artists and their storytellers. I think it's important about the deadlines and how messy that can be. And I also think they have to find a way to promote. They have to find a way to promote comics, whether it is partnering with more comic book stores around the country, whether it is making more of an effort to make more, be more inclusive, basically, of stories. Like, promote more stories that are not just superhero centric. Like all those non-superhero comics can definitely have a place on the international or the national stage, and then thus the international stage. I also think having more comic book centered events at international conventions would do wonders. I think introducing more stories would be interesting. I do think, like, again, promotion and marketing is super important, because no one's going to read what they don't know of. No one's going to read what they don't see. And I think if you find a way to really, and I mean really, make an effort to reach people where they're at, and make stories there's stories for kids, there's stories for teenagers, there's stories for adults, there's stories for people who like romance, there's stories for people who like sports. I think to promote more of those stories, and give more funding to people who are trying to get those stories promoted, I think is important. Because I think because of the lack of adaptations, one-on-one adaptations for comic books, and the lack of, you do need more marketing. Because again, anime and these manga, these games that are coming from these manga and all this stuff do really well to promote the manga. It does amazing. Comic books don't have that luxury, so they have to do more traditional marketing strategies. And I think that comic books have not done a good job. But besides even that, some of the stories are very mundane, very boring, very repetitive, and that's why they need a huge switch up, and why it's not just about rebooting the universe so people can start over or find a place to start from, but it's also about giving new stories, new cultures a look, and promoting more voices and having those uplift the industry. And I think comic books are very stuck in a pre-cell phone era type of storytelling and promotion, and you just can't do that. So with that being said, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Let me know your thoughts on why you think manga is getting more popular or is more popular than comic books, and or what do you think comic books can do to be more prevalent as a media form in America, the United States, or in the international stage in general. See you on the next one. Keep geeking out. Peace.